Welcome in the greatest podcast in sports betting entertainment. My name is Tanner Kern, certified G, bona fide stud, and you can't teach that. In this right here, this is G Money Grant Mitchell. We are giving you picks, knowledge, insight, and everything you could ever want today on Ride the Line, and you can't teach that. Bada boom, man of the people in the room, Grant, are you riding on this Wednesday edition of RTL?
I'm riding, Tanner. I'm riding just like the Michigan Wolverines. We're riding against the Crimson Tide. I'm riding just like Michael Penix Jr. is riding his way to a top 5 pick in the NFL draft. I'm riding. I'm really excited. Get pumped to be back home. It's good to be back in the home, comfortable environment. I know you're still on the road for the next few weeks, but I'm feeling good. We don't have a lot of games to pick from in the sports, not the NFL weekend, waiting for the college football playoff championship game, but we've got an awful lot to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, eventually we'll transition into NBA and college basketball for the majority of the show when the NFL ends, and obviously college football coming to an end. But right now we got some picks. We're going to talk some NFL and, of course, some college football. But before we do that, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, like, share, do it all. Click the buttons down below, comment who you're taking, and we will get back to you on there. We love seeing you guys get in on the show and talk about us, interact with us in the comments. So make sure you do that. And Grant, let's talk about some college football here. The Michigan Wolverines started the night off with a win over Alabama. I thought the Crimson Tide gave away this game, but you got to tip your cap to Michigan. What were your thoughts?
So I can see why you would say that, but I would disagree in the sense that I don't think Alabama really should have ever been in that game. I mean, Michigan just had some really egregious mistakes. There was a huge drop on third down. Obviously, they had the muffed punt. The special teams were a disaster all night long. The decisions to make a fair catch and not field the ball or field it and then run for it. Everything was just off, and you saw it really come back to bite them. That was the only reason that Alabama was in that game to begin with. When we think of the Crimson Tide, and don't get me wrong, I think they earned their spot. They should have. Well, I don't know how to put this. They earned the right to be in there. Florida State also earned the right. I know it's a controversial topic. I don't want to revisit it. They should have been in there ahead of Georgia, and everybody knew they were going to give Michigan a good game. But this Alabama team is not the dominant perennial championship contender that it has been in the years past. And the biggest evidence of that for me was the fact that they got tossed around in the trenches. Sure, they made some good defensive stands, but they had all sorts of problems on the offensive line. Hell, they couldn't even snap the ball properly half the time. It seemed like that final play of the game, it was a bad snap, and that ultimately delayed the timing. Milroe might have had a shot behind the guard to get the end zone if that ball is where it needs to be on time. But I just thought Michigan was the more dominant team. I thought they were the aggressor in this matchup. And granted, the styles make fights, and we're going to talk about how they match up with Washington going into the championship game. But I just viewed them as the overall better team. They really did a good job limiting Milroe. Anything he got was with scrambles, and it was scrambles stepping up in the pocket. It's not like he never broke contain or anything. He was just making some good plays. So I think Michigan deserved to win. That Blake Corum run at the end of the game was an all-timer as far as postseason college football moments go, and I'm looking forward to the next matchup.
So I originally took Alabama on this show, and then I changed my pick to Michigan. I did not bet a side in the game because I didn't want to bet against Nick Saban. You're right. I do think Alabama was dominated in the trenches, but the fact of the matter is they were in the game. Michigan had to drive the field to win it at the end. But Alabama really didn't have anything going up front. And that was the biggest issue. And what they did well with Jalen Milroe, they weren't doing, right? The scrambles, like putting the ball in his hand. They weren't getting the job done there. They were just going back to trying to have him be a pocket passer. It simply wasn't working because the offensive line was so bad. So that was surprising from Nick Saban that they were unable to adjust in the game. But going to the final play of the game, when Jalen Milroe gets stuffed by Michigan's front seven, looked like a terrible play call. Obviously, it's not a good play call because it didn't work. But what were your thoughts on the final play?
So I don't like the play call, but it wasn't doomed from the start like it seemed. It was the bad snap, first of all, threw off the timing. There was a very narrow gap that Milroe had to squeeze through, but they got what they wanted with the confusion, the motion. They got something going with the field side defensive end. They had the guard pulling. They had a little bit of a hole that Milroe maybe could have snuck through if the timing is there. I'm still not quite sure that it is. I think he's still about a half step behind, but he would have at least had a fighting chance if the snap is where it's supposed to be. I mean, the fact he dove from the 5-yard line, I mean, I've never really seen that work before. I don't know what he was thinking. Maybe it was just a desperation sort of move. It was a very questionable play call. For me personally, in those situations, I want my best player to have the ball, and that is Milroe, no doubt. But to take away all options and say you are a quarterback running up the middle from the 5-yard line, like let's get a rollout, or let's get some crossers going in the back of the end zone. Maybe we can find somebody open. Maybe we get a little scramble drill, or if worst comes to worst, Milroe can take off, and the defense is still worried about guarding those receivers. They can't divert all of their attention to stopping him. So I like that Milroe did have it, but personally, I would have gone with something else.
I wanted to see him on the perimeter, use the athleticism, get him out, give him a passing option. Now, there was an RPO attached to that. I believe it doesn't look like it because the play was collapsed. But like going back to the snap, I saw a lot of people talk about the snap today. That was a problem all night. The snap wasn't necessarily the biggest issue on that play. It was the fact that Michigan caved the offensive line. Like they just brought them downhill, and there was no room for him to run on that play. So I would like to see him get outside on the perimeter. Credit to Michigan. I think they're the better team. I do think Washington matches up very well against Michigan, especially if Michigan plays like they did against Alabama. Because if the Wolverines lose that game, we're talking about all the errors that Michigan made, because they made a lot of errors. And Washington didn't do that against Texas. They were fantastic. Obviously starts with Michael Penix. He was great throwing the ball down the field. I'm slightly worried about the run game for Michigan. I think they're going to be able to pound the rock, but I really like the explosive plays that Washington can create, and I don't think Michigan has that same capability in the passing game. Before we break that down, though, Washington beats Texas. I wasn't necessarily surprised. I don't think Texas was as good as people thought, but what do you think?
Yeah, as you know from our preview shows, I had Michigan and I had Washington. So wasn't surprised with these outcomes. It's what I was expecting. What I saw from Washington, though, was very impressive to me, because if you look at Washington's recent games, they hadn't won a game by more than 10 points in 8 straight games. Now, I know that streak extended to 9, but really that's a 2-3 score game. They also had a special teams problem of their own. They get a stand against Texas on either this, I think it was their second drive of the game, and they hold them at like their own 20 or 30. They muff the punt and they give the ball to Texas at their 20. So that's 7 points that Texas shouldn't have gotten. Texas also should not have had the opportunity to drive down the field at the end of the game. It just so happened that the one and only thing that could have possibly happened to stop the clock, a Washington injury, is what ended up happening. So that game was really not as close as it should have been. Also, at the end of the first half, if Washington takes just a little more time before they score, Texas doesn't even have the opportunity to tie it up going into halftime, and Washington gets the ball coming out of halftime. So in my opinion, that was like a 20-point game that just kind of freakishly came down to 6 points and a final pass that realistically Quinn Ewers probably should have delivered. But to your point, Washington was by far the better team in my opinion. They looked like they were in control of not just the game, but the tempo the entire time. Texas was on their heels the whole time. And one thing I've got to say about Michael Penix, like everybody knows he's good, but that performance was an all-timer in my opinion. And I know we only had 2 touchdowns, but not just the windows that he was fitting the ball into, but the decision making, some of his movement and his control and his presence in the pocket, his ability to create new angles, whether it was with his hips or his feet or his arm angles, the leverage, where he was putting the ball as far as the leverage goes. He was not just throwing contested balls, but he was throwing it to the perfect spot where if his guy didn't make the catch, they had no chance to intercept it. It was just going to fall incomplete. But we know Washington's got a lot of first round, second round receiver talent, so they were able to come up with most of those catches too. So it was a great game from them. They are extremely explosive. There was one point in the game, Penix was averaging like 30 yards per completion. So I'm glad they won. I think they were the better team, and I am excited to see them fight for a natty.
Yeah, he was fantastic. And the thing about Texas coming into the game, Texas's biggest weakness was Washington's strength as far as getting the ball down the field. Texas couldn't defend the vertical passing game, and we saw that. They weren't able to. Texas, though, offensively, I thought they could have run the ball a little more early in counts, like early, and not early in counts, I'm thinking baseball season, early in drives, get some good yardage on first and second down where you're not sticking Quinn Ewers behind the chains, because they did that consistently throughout the night. And I think the biggest thing Washington did, though, was force Texas to be uncomfortable, right? Getting those vertical plays, getting explosive plays down the field. It just puts Texas in so many bad spots. I think we're going to see that with Michigan as well. Now, we're going to give our picks on Monday's show for this game, but just off the top, Grant, who are you leaning to in the national championship?
Well, real quick, because this does tie into Michigan, we know they're a power run team. Blake Corum was only 35th in rushing yards as far as the entire college landscape goes, but he was first in rushing touchdowns, and we know he gets a ton of volume. Texas ran the ball 28 times for 180 yards and 3 touchdowns. They were dicing them up. I mean, I was really impressed with what Jaden Blue was able to do. Would have loved to have seen him get more than 9 carries because, to your point, they were carving up the Washington line. Washington's defensive front played its best game of the season in the Pac-12 championship against Oregon. Before the season, they were, I believe, 41st in rushing yards allowed per game, and I think 88th in yards per carry allowed. So against Texas, we knew that was going to be a problem. It ended up being one. Their explosive offense allowed them to kind of overcome it. But that is something that's going to show up against Michigan, especially considering that Michigan also has an outstanding offensive line. Like you said, picks are coming on Monday's show, so I don't want to give everything away. But just off the top of my head, when I think about what Michigan does really well, for me, it's obviously the trenches. And the strength of that defense is really the front seven. We saw them getting after Jalen Milroe, collapsing the pocket, stopping the run. They were doing pretty much everything they had to. I don't think they're going to be able to do that with Washington. First of all, Washington's got a pro-style offense with a head coach that is excellent at play design. They've got a top 5, probably top 10 wide receiver on the outside. They've got Michael Penix, who's also going to be going in the top 10 most likely. This is a team that's super explosive, and according to Pro Football Focus, their offensive line was the 3rd best pass blocking unit in the country. So it's not like we're about to see a Bryce Young situation where we've got a quarterback with talent with nobody to protect him. No, Penix is going to have time in the pocket, and we know when he has that time, he will find his guys down the field. And that turns it into this whole situation of, can Michigan with J.J. McCarthy, can they either A, find some explosiveness like they did last year against Ohio State, or B, can they dominate the time of possession and maybe force a turnover or two to keep the ball out of Penix's hand? Even though Michigan is the better overall team, they really only have those 2 ways to win the game, in my opinion. They're a good team and they can do it, but I think it's got to be one of those 2.
This is not a good matchup for Michigan at all because J.J. McCarthy can't create explosive plays in the passing game. They are not a vertical passing team. They want to run the ball at Blake Corum. Great, they can do that, but if they stall out on drives and get behind the sticks, Washington's secondary can compete, which is an issue they've had all year when teams are able to be in 2nd and short, 3rd and short. But when they're in 3rd and long, Washington's just as good as anyone in that situation in those low conversion rate plays. So when you're looking at Michigan in this football game, if they don't come out and run the ball, pretty much score on nearly every drive in this game, it's going to take a lot of points for them to win. Washington can strike at any time. They can strike so quickly if they just play mistake-free football, don't turn the ball over, which they really haven't outside of the muff punt and a few other mistakes throughout the season. They're going to be just fine in this football game, and I think they're going to find a way to win it. And they could do it by double digits, in my opinion, because Michigan just can't create those explosive plays.
Can I give an NFL comparison here for what we need to see from Michigan? Michigan needs to become the Cleveland Browns. They run the ball, dominate the time of possession, don't let anything by you on the front. And when they're passing, when Washington's passing the ball, you got to create pressure. And granted, we saw getting Joe Flacco in there for the Browns, that verticality really opened up the offense and they're more dangerous. We know that they were still struggling with Deshaun Watson, PJ Walker, Dorian Thompson-Robinson. There's no guy that's going to come off the bench for Michigan, so they're going to have to overcome that against probably the most explosive offense in America.
And Michigan might create pressure in this game too, but Washington's quick game is going to hurt them, right? Like Alabama didn't make them pay for blitzing all night. Washington can make them pay and make them pull off that blitz. So I really like Washington in this football game. I think 4.5 points is a great deal. And I also think that they're just continuously being disrespected against a team where this probably should be a pick 'em matchup. So we will break down this all on Monday in our college football show, but we got a few topics to talk about in the NFL here. Number one being the Cleveland Browns, going back to them, the number 1 most bet team or number 2 most bet team since Sunday on DraftKings to win the Super Bowl. Obviously, the value's good. I don't really see it as much, but the public's high on the Browns. So why do you think that is?
Well, I think that one of the main reasons is that a lot of the top offenses either aren't clicking like they should be, or we don't trust them. Who's been the best offense of the past half decade? The Chiefs. Well, they're not even in the top 10 this season. Okay, well, what about some of the other best teams? Brock Purdy and the 49ers? Well, Purdy threw 4 interceptions as soon as he came up against a great defense. What about Dak Prescott? Well, he's amazing at home, but he's not that great on the road. What about the Dolphins? They can't beat a winning team. So if you're looking at this Browns team, you have faith that your defense can take care of whatever offense you go against. And then from there, Joe Flacco, I don't know how he's playing the best football that he has in a decade, even though he's almost 40 years old and just came off his couch. And there's a chance that Cleveland's going on the road to Baltimore early in the playoffs. And if you're getting, I think there would be their second game of the playoffs, you're getting a Ravens team that hasn't played in 2 weeks because the starters aren't going to play this week and they're going to get the bye next week. You win that game, you've knocked off the top dog in your conference, and you have all the momentum in the world. So I absolutely think the Browns are an extremely scary team. I hate to beat a dead horse, but I've said it all year. This Super Bowl team begging for even average quarterback play. Flacco is giving it to them. I see the future with the Browns. I see the vision.
I think that Flacco's turned the ball over a little too much, though. That's my biggest fear with him. If I had to give a critique there, the AFC is wide open. I'm on the Bills. I think they find a way to win it, but the Ravens have looked great, obviously. The Ravens got to come back to earth at some point. The Browns have already beaten them this year, so it should be a tight race there in the AFC. Overall, though, I would not bet the Browns for more than the value. I think the value is good. I just don't see them as a serious threat. But again, a lot of people probably said Washington wasn't a serious threat at the beginning of the season, too. So
let me ask you a question here. So you're worried about Flacco's turnovers, but you like the Bills, even though Josh Allen has the most turnovers in the league.
I think it's a more explosive offense.
Yeah, but their defense is shakier, and their offense might be more explosive, but it's also prone to gagging.
I still trust Josh Allen with the ball in his hands more than Joe Flacco down the stretch if you got to go out and win a football game. And Josh Allen turns the ball over a lot more. He does because he's asked to do so many things, right? But in crunch time, I'm gonna back him in this spot over Joe Flacco with the ball in his hands with 2 minutes to go and win the game.
I can understand that. I will say, as far as the Ravens coming back down to earth, it's not like it's happening in week 4. It's happening in their final regular season game because the starters aren't going to play this weekend. So this is, as far as being up at your absolute very best, is a good time to be playing your best football. Now, Lamar's got, we should probably have a very quick legacy talk about Lamar. Even if he gets to the Super Bowl and loses, a 2-time MVP with a Super Bowl appearance at age 25, that puts him on a historic track. There's no 2-time MVP that has not made the Hall of Fame. And if the Ravens win a Super Bowl, I mean, we're talking about, like it or not, one of the best starts to a career we've ever seen. I mean, 2 MVPs, a Super Bowl appearance, that's not a Super Bowl win. That's 1 Super Bowl away from what Mahomes has got. We're talking about the definitive number 2 quarterback in the league. And, whether you want to say he's helped by the defense or not, sure, that's a big part of it. But you can't argue with what he's done this season.
I wouldn't even put Mahomes at number 1. You can't. You've seen Mahomes come back to earth without receivers. You've seen what talent does.
And Lamar, to be fair, has not had receiver talent for his career.
He does this year, and you're seeing it make a difference. Like, you're seeing how much these, if you give an elite quarterback receivers, it makes a difference. Like, Patrick Mahomes has not played well this year. He hasn't at all. He doesn't.
Washington, not Commanders, Huskies, has a better receiving core than the Chiefs do.
Yeah, so, is Patrick Mahomes the best quarterback in the league? Yeah, if you give him Tyreek Hill, he's pretty good. Right? Like, whoever.
So is Tua.
So is Tua, right? So it's like I wouldn't sit here and say, I want the ball. I want Patrick Mahomes to have the ball in his hands with 2 minutes to go to win a game. I want the best quarterback. So Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Tua, Lamar, with the best receivers to have the ball in their hands to go win the game, right? I think this year has really showed us that Patrick Mahomes isn't invincible. He's got really good receivers, great quarterback, but receivers make such a difference.
I think that's a really good take.
Yeah. So in the NFL, is there anything else you want to talk about, Grant? We got 1 pick each, NBA and college basketball for Wednesday, but what else you got?
Was there something else that we had talked about?
Bills, AFC East championship game. Quick little glimpse into that. We'll be giving picks for this on Friday, obviously, but I think the Bills are very dangerous in the AFC.
Yeah, it's quite the predicament that the Bills find themselves in. Win and you're the 2 seed in the conference, losing, there's a chance, a pretty realistic chance that you end up missing the playoffs. Kind of wild where they find themselves. They are favored by 3 points on the road against the Dolphins. Again, we're not giving picks on this. Buffalo already beat the Dolphins by 28 points earlier this year, 48-20. Granted, that was at home. It was in that first 4 week stretch where the the Bills were playing the best football of the year. Miami, of course, coming off that enormous loss to Baltimore, but they are 7-1 at home. It's a very strange sort of situation with a resurgent Bills team that's won 4 games in a row, but the Bills have played like hot garbage the last 2 weeks. I mean, they need to come back from 2 touchdowns down in the fourth quarter against Easton Stick 2 weeks ago. And then last week, the Patriots commit 4 turnovers inside their own 30-yard line in the first 20 minutes of that game, and the Patriots still almost won. I mean, Josh Allen, 160 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception. Just another terrible game from him, completed 50% of his passes. It's the total up and down, the parabolic effect that you get with this team. I understand why they're favored on the road against Miami, but I would have trouble backing them, even though the Dolphins do have problems beating winning teams.
Dolphins have a lot of injuries too. That's the biggest thing. I think that's why they're favored.
The Bradley Chubb injury, I just gotta say, should have never happened. You're down 35 points. Get him out of the game. There's 4 minutes left.
Well, that's Mike McDaniel makes some questionable decisions. We see it all the time. Like, I think like to his shoulder, that's another issue coming into this game, right? There's a lot of problems for Miami and the Bills too. Like, they play up to good teams. They play down to bad teams. So seeing what they did against the Chargers and the Patriots, that's the Buffalo Bills. That's what they've been. They're going to ride. They're not going to drop the ball this weekend against the Dolphins. I'm not saying they win the football game, but they're not going to play like they did against the Patriots and the Chargers. It's not what they do.
By the way, Sean McDermott, 4-0 since turning his life over to Al-Qaeda.
Yeah. Sean McDermott, the freaking terrorist coach. That's a pretty wild comparison too. That that's going to be what they talk when the Bills win the Super Bowl. That's what they're going to talk about. That's the turning point.
That was the turning point. Yep.
Because you would think they'd go the other way. Like, that was the hit piece on him. You would think they would go downhill, but they actually got better after that came out, which is wild. So.
And what else is wild is they're winning these games with Stephon Diggs being a total non-factor. He doesn't have a 100-yard receiving game in like 2 months.
He has been terrible. So hopefully he gets it. Like last weekend too against Patriots, you're thinking he's going to turn it up because the New England Patriots is a team that he's dominated, but didn't happen at all. So if they start getting him the football too, combined with the run game with James Cook, if Gabe Davis can actually be a little more consistent, this is a dangerous football team.
Yeah, it is, no doubt about it. It's just, are they going to show up? If they do show up, like you said, they play up to the competition. They can beat anybody. You just got to hope that they do it. Moving ahead and looking at some basketball games here. I'll start off. I got the NBA. Tanner's going to hold it down with the college basketball picks. I like the Milwaukee Bucks at -3.5. The line is right now at the Indiana Pacers. Now, I know that they just lost to the Pacers by 9 at home. So you might be asking yourself, why do I like this pick? Well, Tanner, one little thing that I've been doing throughout the season is in my notes app here, I have kept track of every decent big man the Pacers have faced. And I think you're going to find this pretty interesting. So I've got these split into either I got one list of all-star caliber big men, and then I've got an average big man, which is a guy I would put in like the top 15. They've only played one of those players. It was Ivica Zubac. They let him get 18 and 16. But here we go. Let's talk about the all-star level big men. And obviously for the Bucks, that's going to be Giannis. So this is not handpicked either. This is every single good big man the Pacers have faced. Şengün, 30 and 16. Julius Randle, 28 and 12. Giannis, 30 and 18. Cat, 40 and 12. Giannis, 54 and 12. Embiid, 37 and 13. Embiid, 39 and 12. Giannis, 37 and 10. Anthony Davis, 41 and 20. Giannis, 64 and 14. You are more likely than not to score 40 plus points if you're a good man, big man going against the Pacers. And you want proof of that? go load up the sports books. I'm looking at FanDuel right now. They've got his line at over under 35.5 points, and there's minus 125 odds on the over. So there's a good chance this line goes up to 36.5, 37.5 by tip-off. I know that Dame Lillard's been a little bit inconsistent, but the Pacers, Tyrese Halliburton had a really good games last time out, but over the last month, he started to come back down to earth. Teams are figuring out that you can be physical with him, and if you send him left, that eliminates a lot of his dribble pull-up game. I think the Bucks just come out and destroy them. I mean, Indiana's defense is terrible. Giannis is going to probably go for like 50 and 15, something like that. I'll take the Bucks minus 3.5.
Yeah, I like the Bucks here too. I think the big men are going to dominate, obviously, like Giannis, but pretty much the entire team. So moving into who I think is going to dominate in college basketball for our final pick of today's show, I really like the Miami Hurricanes to lose at home to the Clemson Tigers. See what I did there? A little flip. I'm going to go Clemson minus 2.5 in this game here. When you look at Miami, they're just really beat up right now. That's the biggest reason to go against them. Ugo Poplar's probably not going to play, potentially not going to. We'll know more when we see an injury report tomorrow. They're also going to be missing. Let me see here. Also missing Nigel Pack, I believe. He's questionable for this game, too. So that's a lot of production that you're missing out of those two players. And then when you look at Clemson as a whole, they have a lot of momentum right now, the way they've been playing. So looking at them in this spot, I really do like them to find a way to cover just because of Miami's injuries, but also at the same time, too, when you look at how good Clemson has been as of late with all the momentum that they have, really going to be on them in this spot.
Yeah, I mean, Miami, this is the second year in a row. No, second in the last 3 years that they've had an awful lot of roster turnover. They're only 7-6, ninth in the ACC so far. Obviously, they lose Jordan Miller. They lose Isaiah Wong. They lose a lot of important guys. What's his name? Wardenberg. They lose 4 of their 5 starters from last year. The one that's returning, like you said, Nigel Pack, he's questionable here. They got a nice win, I guess, against Boston College, but not Boston College. Sorry, I don't know who I'm thinking of, but they haven't been playing well lately. That's the bottom line. I would be going against Miami in this spot as well.
It's tough to do it when they're at home, but still feeling really high on Clemson in this game to find a way to win. The spread's actually jumped up from 1.5 up to 2.5. So that's working in our favor. So get it now before this comes out on Wednesday, and it's 3.5. But anyways, Grant, that was another edition of Ride the Line. We talked some NFL, talked some college football, talked some picks for the NBA and the college basketball, which we'll be doing more of as we roll on. But why don't you take us out of the show for this Wednesday edition?
Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Like we said earlier in the show, we are going to be back with our NFL picks for the weekend on Friday's show. And then we're going to be doing nothing but talking about the college football playoff national championship game on Monday. So make sure that you are subscribed. Turn the bell notifications on if you want to be alerted when we go live or when we post our picks for the day. Subscribe to the channel. Like the video if you enjoyed. Comment, let us know what your favorite plays for Wednesday are. And we will see you all on the Friday episode of Ride the Line.